Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, How Gate Gourmet Added Efficiency and Resiliency to its AP function, brought to you by IOFM and sponsored by Datamatics. We have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. If you have any technical questions or issues using the WebEx platform, please use the chat box and I will respond right away. If you have any issues with audio, please click on the phone icon above the chat window to receive the teleconference info. For those that do call in, to ensure call quality, everyone's lines have been muted. If you happen to get disconnected, you can log on again using the instructions provided in your webinar confirmation email. If you continue to experience difficulty, please email webinars@iofm.com and we will respond as soon as we can. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box and hit send to submit them. At the end of the presentation, we will have our presenters answer these questions. We will have 2 polling questions during the webinar. A pop-up box will appear when we run each poll. Please choose from the multiple choice answers and hit submit. We'd love to have your participation and insight. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive a thank you email with the on-demand materials within 2 business days. Our first speaker today is Naveen Gupta, EVP and Head of BPM Services at Datamatics. Naveen brings with him over 30 years of varied experience in the field of project management and business process management, delivery management, and incubating new practices, and managing huge enterprise applications programs. Naveen holds a master's degree in economics and a DBF from ICFAI. He is also trained in TQM and is 6 Sigma certified. We will also hear from Sam Venkatnarayan, Director and Controller at Gate Gourmet North America. Sam heads accounting, tax, and account services at Gate Gourmet Inc. In his current role, Sam is responsible for the overall accuracy of the company's financial transactions, continuous improvement of shared service processes, efficiencies, and controls. Sam believes that success of shared services is dependent on superior customer service leveraging sound processes, internal controls, systems, and passionate team members. Prior to Gate Gourmet, Sam had worked with global organizations in Asia, Europe, and the USA. He holds an MBA and Master's of Accounting from UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School at Chapel Hill and a BS in Engineering from NIT. And finally, we will have Jess Shear, Editor at IOFM. Jess is an award-winning business reporter covering the needs of financial operations professionals for more than 2 decades. As IOFM's executive editor, Jess is responsible for continually updating member content on iofm.com, as well as building our certification and event agendas. He is a popular speaker, hosting dozens of webinars each year and keynoting IOFM's conferences. At this time, I'd like to welcome our speakers and hand the webinar off to Naveen.
Thank you very much for joining us. Before we get into understanding the journey that Sam and Datamatics assisted, I think it'd be really helpful, Jovi, if we better understood the audience. I think we're going to start with a polling question. And here it is. So there are lots of factors that drive automation inside of organizations, but we want to understand sort of what is the biggest factor? What is the key driver for you? Is it A, improving team productivity, lowering invoice processing costs, improve cash flow, lessening errors, reducing errors, or supplier enablement and ease of invoice submission? We'll be really curious because I think this will drive the conversation in terms of not just how do you drive resiliency during automation, but why? What is it that you're driving? My guess is that processing costs is probably likely the biggest factor. Debbie and Sam, do you have another guess?
So Jess, I would say improving APD productivity.
Mm. These are all excellent justifications for time, energy, and resources that go into automation.
That will automatically bring in the lower cost, yeah.
So interesting. We have a two-way tie between improving productivity, that was option A, as well as quality issues, reducing errors. What's interesting is that there are significant numbers of answers across the board. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's no wrong reason to automate, but there are lots of different factors. Sam, is this consistent with what was driving Gate Gourmet in your desire to automate? Combination of these things?
Yeah, that's correct. So these were the fundamental drivers for us to get into this automation journey. In a couple of things which I would say, if I given an order of priority, I do see both two options were picked up. From a team perspective, we already had a very small team to process these invoices. But the main thing was to see if we can have a consistent and a standardized process, which was achieved through automation, and we are still in the journey. And the other one is that reducing the errors. That was the main thing, because ours is a huge volume, high volume based transaction.
Right. So let's learn more about Datamatics and Gate Gourmet. Naveen, if you could go to the next slide, I think can better explain where you guys are coming from.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Jovi and Jess. I'd like to welcome you all for this session. So before we go on to the automation and the productivity and the efficiency brought in the Gate Gourmet process, let me just spend a few minutes on Datamatics. Datamatics is an IT and BPM services company where we are providing intelligent solutions for data-driven businesses for increasing productivity and enhanced customer experience, which is very visible by the polling answers also with Jess polled, which is saying improving AP productivity. We have more than 200 plus customers worldwide. We are present in 6 countries for the delivering to nearshore to our customers, as well as global delivery centers in 4 regions. Now I would like request Som to talk about Gate Gourmet.
Hello, good day everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, join this presentation and share some of the experience which Gate and Datamatics, we are still in a process of journey like I mentioned, but share some of the experiences. Gate Gourmet is a leading global provider of airline catering. So if you have taken a flight from Chicago or Atlanta or any of the large airports, you would see our trucks, they're catering for the major airlines around the world. So from a Gate Gourmet perspective, we are located in multiple locations in the US as well as globally. So we are a global company. We're located in practically in all the continents. And we have major customers, and many of them are global customers who expect us to provide the service consistently across the Gate group and across all the continents. Concisely, you would see Gate Gourmet trucks outside, and also we support the airport lounges, which you see in many of the airports. So concisely, that is the Gate Gourmet's business. Thank you, Noreen. Can go to the next slide. So some of the things which we wanted to share in this presentation is that how, from a Gate Gourmet North America perspective, how did we start this automation process? What was driving for us to get into this automation? And then what we are seeing as we are embarking on this journey. So just to give you a context from Gate Gourmet, as I was mentioning, we are located in major airports in the US. So one is that it is geographically scattered operation. Now, from a supplier-based perspective, we do get all these fresh items from the local bakeries. So you have suppliers who supply things across the US, single suppliers, as well as you have mom and pop shop at each one of the airports. We are located in 30 plus locations in the US. Now, since we have a different supplier base, the invoices, what we get is unstructured formats. So sometimes we'll get a PDF document, sometimes it is electronic, and some of them even give us in Excel spreadsheets. So many of these documents come in various unstructured formats. And before the automation journey itself, all of these were manually processed, and the approval system was also through the emails. Now, as you can imagine, when the processes are manual and then things are coming through the email, people on vacation, you lack a visibility across what is going on. And what impact of that is major is the cash planning, and the supplier, from a supplier standpoint of view, the invoices get lost. So other piece is that how we enable our suppliers not coming to our help desk and asking what is the status of our payments. The third piece, as I was saying when we were going through this polling question, is that there were a number of errors which were taking place because it was a manual process, as you can imagine. So the driver for the API automation was to reduce all these things. So how we can provide a platform which can standardize the process across all these 30 locations, come out with an automated workflow rather than work through the emails. Can we leverage a system which has a workflow capability and then helps us to seamlessly communicate with the teams in our operation, as well we can get back to our suppliers on a timely basis. And this also helps us in a better cash management. That was one of the key drivers, few of the key drivers as we were getting into this automation journey. Naveen, anything you want to add on this? Now, as you see, the journey itself started way back in 2000.
I think those were the KPIs which we jointly agreed between Som and myself. And these are the KPIs which have helped a lot, but we will talk about it in a short while. Let me also now request Som to talk about Datamatic journey with Gate Gourmet.
So, as you can see, the first step was from a standardization perspective was to define the KPIs. So the starting process was, hey, what is that we really want to achieve? Because there are so many things we wanted to do, but what we want to agree upon is the KPIs. And also when we started this journey, we said the KPIs is going to be a living and breathing thing. So when we started in 2008, 2009, at that time, whatever the KPIs, these were the really low level KPIs where we need to get, at least we can start on a further automation. But then the KPIs was agreed upon. As we were getting into the process, what we wanted to do is to slowly change the process before we bring the automation. So there was a lot of work we had to do on the Gate Gourmet side internally, what we wanted from a process perspective, put in internal controls. Because ultimately our customer, there were two customers for us. One is the supplier base. So how we can ensure the suppliers are paid on time, or we can set an expectation like, hey, here is what is going on with these invoices. Here is what is in the step of the process. We didn't have this visibility when we started the journey. So we agreed upon this KPIs and where we want to be at a certain, on the process in the years. And then we started this journey. And then came the leveraging some of the automation which were implemented where you see on the top right on the screen. Naveen, do you want to take from here on the automation, how you came up with a proposal and how we started the journey itself?
Yeah, so I was just building upon what Som you were mentioning. So all the platforms which I'll again talk in a short while, whether it is a data capture or automatic data capture through TrueCap or TrueBot, where is a robotic process automation, and then a workflow approval process as well as TrueBI, which is also giving a full transparency, as Som has actually mentioned, to the suppliers as well as to the customers in the entire process of really improving upon and doing the transformation into this journey. So this is what basically Som was also talking about earlier. If you look at the Datamatics F&A offering in the entire P2P or the procure-to-pay space, whatever we are mentioning, whether it is a vendor management, invoice processing, exception handling, help desk support, travel and expense management, 1099 processing, everything is through our automated platform. Starting from data ingestion, to a workflow processing, approval mechanism, building the controls, business rule, business logic, auto validation, so that manual intervention and the manual touch is as less as possible, except where it is warranted, where it is required from the control standpoint. And the same is true for order to cash, record to report, and FP&A process. And all these platform, automation and transformation platform sits on the top of any of the ERP. In case of a Gate Gourmet, it was SAP. Some of the other partners, what we have is Oracle, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, Lawson, or whatnot. And using the same tools and the platform of what we have, whether it is TrueCap Plus, IPM, iMark, IDAT, and all of them are mobile enabled and they're mobile-based solution, as well as providing value-added services of doing analytics to the controllers and the people at the level of a SOM so that they can take a faster decision. So robotic process automation plays a major role where it automates the manual. Whatever process in our daily life is manual in the repeated nature, everything can be automated today. By the help of a technology and the solution platform, whatever we think and we see on the shop floor or in our workspace, which is fairly similar manual process, can be automated through robotic process automation. OCR definitely helps in the data ingestion. For, as Som was mentioning about various formats, various suppliers, unstructured documents, and you just scan it, and then our TrueCap Plus, using the right OCR, scans it to almost 99% accuracy level. Again, AI, artificial intelligence, and the pattern detection, and text and data mining helps to inbuild the validation and intelligence between the platform. Of course, after the entire transaction is through, analytics helps every CFO, which is the point number C of what Jess was mentioning, on the improved cash flows as well as faster decision making, looking at the analytics of the entire transactions of our entire in the P2P space or accounts payable space. Helping with the mobility and the mobile, which was a tremendous help during even the COVID period, where people were really hard pressed for going and leaving to the premise where they can do approval and the work can go on as a business as usual, along with the payment gateway integration. So here is the you can say the blueprint of how it helps. TrueCap in artificial intelligence and machine learning based data capture and conversion. With the right OCR giving reduced error by approximately 80%. IPM, the workflow, again aided by AI, ML, and the intelligent process management, which helps in approval workflow and building in the control checkpoints in the business logic and the auto calculations wherever, along with two-way, three-way matching, whether it is a GRN, whether it is a purchase order, invoice, all auto matching happens through the platform. And then finally, robotic process automation of posting data back to the ERP, and then BI tool using the analytics and data visualization for faster decision making. So just this is the small slide deck what we had. We can go with the polling question, and over to you for keeping the discussion on.
Absolutely. So this is a great overview of what Datamatics did for Gate Gourmet. Let's understand where the audience is in their journey. Jovi, if you could pull up the next poll, let's better understand where everyone is. So which of the following statements best describes the current status of your AP automation journey? Is it A, we have no further plans to automate at this time? We want to automate, but typically the challenge is justifying a business case? Or C, we plan to automate additional key AP processes maybe in the coming months? Or finally, we are fully automated, have no plans to further automate? I would imagine if you're here learning about a case study that you are looking to automate. And so I suspect B and C will be the most popular answers. And I think understanding Gate Gourmet's journey helps to begin to piece together the business case. We're going to go through more of that in just a minute, but I think that's certainly a common challenge. Beyond that, I think folks are sometimes unsure of where to start. And so a conversation like this with a controller, with someone in finance that's gone through this journey can help lend credibility to the case study. So more than 1 in 3 of you are in that situation precisely where you're looking to automate. If we add B and C together, that makes up the majority of responses as expected. I think what's interesting is that just under half of you have no further plans to automate, either because you're already fully automated or you simply have no plans to add additional automation, but are here likely to figure out how to better optimize what you currently have. So we can talk about that as well. So as I mentioned, I think what we've just discussed is a really good sort of high-level overview of Gate Gourmet's journey. But now what I'd like to do is dig in a little bit deeper, Sam, if you wouldn't mind. You said you started with KPIs. I suspect, though, that that's because you had other things in place, and something that I'm finding that a lot of organizations are struggling with. So a lot of organizations struggle with strategic alignment, with governance, with visualizing the process even before they get to the KPIs and the change management piece. Can you speak to sort of where your processes were? You said they're highly manual, but can you speak to where they were even before you started this journey?
Sure. So just to give a context, we were processing approximately 20 to 25,000 invoices on a monthly basis. And wow. We had 4 different systems where this invoices was processed. So we had SAP, then there were a couple of homegrown ERP systems, and then there was one standard ERP system, but it was so much customized. So we had multiple systems. And I also mentioned the formats in which we were receiving the invoices were pretty different. So there were electronic invoice receipt and payment, and then on the other hand, we used to also get Excel spreadsheet as invoices. So when we started the journey itself, so one thing which we wanted to be, and as you rightfully said, we want to visualize where we want to be. When we started the journey, it was not about the efficiency, it's about the effectiveness. How we want to reduce the errors, and then how we can have a greater visibility within the organization. So just as an example, since I was mentioning, we receive all these invoices in 30 plus different locations. Every location had its own timeline to process the invoices and send it. Usually we would see all our goods receipt and not invoice, GR&I, would increase at the end of the month. So when we actually close the month, that would be the time most of the unit would process their invoices. So we didn't have a good understanding of a liability at the beginning of the month so that we can plan for it, what should be coming for the upcoming months. So these were some of the challenges we are facing. So the KPI at that time when we wanted to do is, it's not about how fast we do things, but how right we do the things to start with. So the KPIs was geared towards it. But right now, after the journey, I would say 3-4 years now, we have a mix of effectiveness and efficiency. So when we started, it was more about the effectiveness point of view. And the change management, you say, that's the most tough part. Because and since we are so dispersed from a location perspective, one is that getting along all the folks internally and also getting input support from our suppliers. So that was a challenge from a change management perspective, because these processes have been running for multi-years. I would say 20, 30 years, this has been the process. Now, if you're going to say, hey, we are going to do this and here's what we expect, it's going to be a change from a people perspective. Okay, how can this happen? Like you're saying, you're visualizing this, but we don't see how we can get there because this is the way we have been doing for the last 30 years. So some of these challenges were there. But again, it's a general change management journey. It's nothing specific to AP automation. So we slowly started with effectiveness rather than getting into the efficiency piece.
And that's a great place, because often what happens is things get worse before they get better, right? Particularly from, and this isn't a knock on any specific technology, but there's always a learning curve. And so I think if your focus is on effectiveness, on quality measures, on reducing duplicate invoices, et cetera, then that's what you're going to measure. That's what you're going to manage as you begin this process. And our benchmarking data, IOFM is actually in the process now of releasing our 2021 benchmarking reports. And what we find is that best practice organizations keep error rates to less than 2% of invoices. So if, as you're automating, as you are increasing your speed, as you're increasing efficiency, if you can maintain error rates of under 2%, then you're best in class. Does that sound about right to you, Sam?
You're absolutely right. When we started the journey, it was very high. And right now, I'm happy to inform you, like I said, we're still in the journey. We have a lot of things to leverage, but at this point of time, we are like around 99.9%.
Wow.
Yes, the other piece is that the volume has reduced with the pandemic situation, but we were in this journey. We knew we will get there, and we are there. And the other piece is that we're constantly looking at what is driving the error. Is it internal process or it is automation? So the journey here, or the focus here, is that how we can reduce the manual touch and automate so that the process is seamless and runs. Once you automate, once you go through this process, the pain might be at the beginning, but once you've started, the efficiency will always follow through. The thing is the effectiveness, how we can reduce the errors. So just to give you an example, like I said, we process a lot of invoices. Once one person who was processing the invoice, instead of putting the invoice amount from the invoice itself, the person put the PO amount. Luckily, our PO number goes to 6 digits. If it was like 8 digits, we would have paid the vendor in millions, right? So it's a very simple error. So somebody put the PO number in the invoice amount. So those kind of things are reduced as you go into this OCR process. So most of them are automated. So it's not like somebody key punching or using the keyboard to enter the information.
Right. I'm just looking at the slide that we have on the screen now, the TrueBot process with 100% accuracy. That I think that speaks to how far you guys have come. We're already getting questions from the audience, and I would strongly suggest if you do have questions, feel free to just add them to the chat window, and we'll get to as many as time allows. We have a question that sort of takes you back to the beginning of this journey. So let's start there before we get too far ahead of ourselves. And that is, how much time did it take from project kickoff to sign off? And I guess as I'm assuming why they're asking this, what were some of the things that you had to work through in between the kickoff and sign off periods?
And I'm going to assume the sign off is once the project is implemented and we sign off the process, it is successful with Datamatics, correct?
Right. Yeah. I think from the point you write a check to the point that you're ready then to implement, obviously, there's a lot of homework that has to be done, and we can get into that. That's some of the stuff that we found out from the benchmarking report. But was that a quick process, or was there a lot of work that went involved to get from point A to point B?
All right. So again, coming from my personal experience and the Datamatics experience, what we said is that we are going to have a 2-year roadmap, a plan. But to just get the first step after, say, a year or so, people are going to lose patience. So every step of the process, what we agreed upon is that we will release or come up with an improvement in a burst of 3 to 6 months. So there are small successes in this roadmap. So the question is that how long did it take from kickoff to the sign off? So typically it is 3 to 4 months, but we picked up a specific part of the process for the implementation. So it is visible for people who are sitting in the fence on the change management perspective to support the process. Because ultimately the success of this across is people adapting to the new process and the new workflow and the new procedures. And I'm happy to say that this worked for us. And then 2 years from now, with 30 plus locations we are in, has been a complete support from all the individuals involved in this process, from the operation all the way up to the regional office. So we did in a burst of 3 to 4 months. So that's what we were looking at. Part of the process, not go for the whole implementation or the full implementation, which takes time.
Absolutely. That's an impressive amount of work that was done in just over a quarter. One of the things that I'm going to read in between the lines of that question a little bit and get into what were some of the challenges. How did AP convince the controller, for example, that this was a worthwhile investment? And then we can get into how not only how it was sold up, but how it was sold into the AP staff as well. But why don't we start with did AP come to you to say we need this? Did you go to AP and say we want to invest in you? What was that process like? What was that conversation?
Yeah, so I think I would say we were just fortunate to be in a certain point of time where there were errors. The other piece is that just a discontent from our supplier base because lack of visibility. We used to get a lot of emails in the AP mailbox, the help desk for AP, a lot of emails coming in asking, hey, where are my invoices? Because there was a lack of visibility to it. So and procurement was getting, once AP is not able to find the invoices, then the next level of escalation goes to the procurement team, who negotiate the contracts with the suppliers. So across the board, there was kind of a discontent, and now there was a recognition that we need to do something to improve the process. So now from a business case standpoint of view, I think I saw from a polling question, 18% said, okay, hey, we want to do automation, but the business case is difficult. I'm struggling with the business case. I think where we went with the business case is that one, reduction of errors, because I said like we were processing 20 to 25,000 invoices on a monthly basis. Reduction of errors, and then the suppliers were coming with payment term changes. They were requesting, hey, listen, some of our invoices are getting lost in transit. So say, for example, if somebody is having a payment term of 45 days, they want to reduce it to 30 days. Clearly, this is going to have an impact from a financial perspective. So the question is that whether AP came to me or I went to the AP, it was a joint recognition from me, from the AP team and the procurement team, going to the management saying, here is what is the feedback, what we are getting from the supplier base as well as internally, because many of the suppliers also would go to the operation because that's where they're delivering the goods, saying that, hey, we haven't received payment for these invoices. So it was a joint exercise going to the management saying, this is what we expect to achieve from this improvement. And then we got support from the management as well. So essentially, a happy combination of different functional teams to put in an improvement proposal to the management.
It absolutely helps to have a burning platform, something that everyone recognizes is broken. Clearly, that was something that you were recognizing because errors cost money from a controller's perspective. I definitely see that. Do you remember if there was resistance internally within AP? Often we see that as a challenge to get projects going.
Absolutely. We saw the resistance from the AP as well as the operations team from a unit perspective, because it is always easy, because most of us are on emails all the day, is just to type an email and send it across, not use the workflow. So there were resistance, but once like I said, we were releasing any of these changes in a burst of 3 to 4 months, depending upon what process we are improving. So once it was visible to the people seeing the change and the improvement, slowly we got a lot of support internally from the team. So yes, we did have resistance. The process itself, when we started, it was a very transparent process with the AP team, with the procurement team, and with Datamatics. First of all, we mapped out the process, what is happening currently. So when I was talking about visualization, the first thing we started was to document the current process, and then document the to-be process, where Datamatics did that, explaining, hey, here is how we are going to see the process once we implement all these things. And here is going to be the different phases, how we are going to get there. So once you have that visualization, and then once you show that, yes, there is improvement in first as we do it in 3 or 6 months, then the entire team was on board.
In just understanding the biographies of the two gentlemen on the line, I think Naveen's background with Lean Six Sigma, which is all about process standardization and wringing out inefficiencies, definitely helped sort of speak the language that you were describing, that there were the as-is and to-be visualizations of the process. Is that what you think helped when you went from identifying that there was a need to then identifying who the right solution provider was going to be? Was that part of the fit that made Datamatics such a great partner?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we want someone to work with us through the journey. Because many times when we go for external support, it would be, hey, once we have the documentation, when we can start doing all these things, or first we talk about the tools. I personally believe there should be a strong process, and tools supports those processes. It's not about the tools. If you go along in the market, you would see a lot of tools being offered. But the main thing is that who can understand the process better and the deficiencies in the process better, how you can, that entity who's supporting in this journey can visualize the process, what the end state would be. Yes, there is always going to be a little bit of changes as we go through this journey, but who can visualize where we want to be working with their client? So certainly that's where Datamatics fits in, being the partner.
Can you speak more about the evaluation process, how you went about selecting the technology and the vendor?
So when I was working with Datamatics, so listen, there are so many tools, and like TrueCap, TrueBot, and other things also in the market. For me, these are names, but here is what we would like to see from an automation perspective. Like, let's take the example of OCR. As I was mentioning, when we were receiving this invoices, the manual invoices in different formats, the idea being is that, yes, I'm aware there is an OCR technology available. Yes, it can scan the invoices coming in, and then it can pre-populate whatever the ERP system we are using from an invoice recognition standpoint. I was not so much into TrueCap, selecting the tools. That I left to the partner. I say, okay, you tell me what is that you can do. But I was much more focused into the process rather than the tool itself. This is my expectation. And then as we were working through the process flow, we were also identified what are the points where there's a manual touch point and there's a scope of automation. Now, I'm not an expert in Datamatics, IPM, TrueBI, or TrueBot. But where I wanted to see very visually is that where are the manual touch points in the total end-to-end process and what can be automated, and then it gets into the cost of automation, cost versus benefit, et cetera, et cetera. But the main thing is that not getting so much into the tools, but just focus on the process and ensure there is controls. So even if something fails, then there is a fail-safe catch. Hope that answers.
That process piece is huge. Let me unpack that in a couple different ways. First and foremost, one of the things that we found in our benchmarking data was the combination of standardized processes and, I can't stress the and enough, and automation is what drives better performance, right? If you've got an inconsistent, broken process, the manual process you were describing with lots of errors, and you just threw technology on top of it, it doesn't matter how great that technology is. All you're doing is making the bad process worse faster. On the flip side, if all you focus in is on the process side, there are some inefficiencies you can wring out, but there's a limit to how much inefficiency you can wring out of an inefficient process. Starting with standardizing the process and then adding the right tool for your fit on top of that is what we found in our data that drives performance. Failing to combine those two, failing to focus on the process piece at the outset usually results in never getting the results you're looking for. Speaking of results, we're getting questions about KPIs. That was one of the first steps you described. Do you remember what your initial KPIs were and how those may have evolved over time?
Sure. Again, it is jogging back to memory. But before I answer the question, and it was very well said, as you mentioned, that the process, you focus on the process, and if you put tools on a broken process, you just aggravate the situation. That's one. Right. And the second thing, if you just focus on the process, not think about the tools, you can only go so far. Now, how we can drive the automation, how we can drive this, get into the efficiency sphere. So that comes with automation and standardization, because we know there's going to be, if it's still going to be a manual process, people change. So there is still always going to be this training part of it. Without automation, even with a sound process, you may get into the same place after 2 or 3 years. So it has to be a combination of both of them. So coming back to your question on the initial KPIs, since at that time when we started, it was more errors, and then how long it takes for the AP team to process an invoice to the end-to-end. So the KPIs would be something like this. How many invoices we processed, how many of them had error, are these critical errors or non-critical errors, and how much was the total time it took for processing the invoices from the time when we received the invoices to the time we made the payment. And also we were looking at the way the GR&I and the AP, the liability, it flowed through. So those were the key things which we tracked at the beginning.
Those are important metrics, to be sure. I think one of the things that's important is, and you hit the nail on the head with how you define the metric, when you receive the invoice. Often I see organizations that are trying to game the system say, oh, we'll start when we receive the final invoice, right? But if you've already received 2 or 3 copies of that invoice, that's the lost time, right? So it's when you receive the invoice or the date of invoice until it's ready to pay, what that time period is. And from our benchmarking report, what we can find is that those that can pay 90% of their invoices on time are doing a good job. And we only find organizations that have solid processes and technology enablement able to consistently hit that 90% benchmark rather. Those organizations that have not yet invested in automation or are not getting efficient returns from their automation investment because of poor processes. And our benchmarking report looks at both process and technology. Those organizations that are failing on one end of the spectrum or the other typically fail to hit that 90% benchmark. And that's important for a number of reasons. It means that you're spending a lot of time chasing down and paying late, hurting relationships with vendors. It also means that you're not in a position to pursue early pay discounts or other things that can benefit an organization. Typically, again, just to share from our benchmarking report, what we find is that for every $1 billion in PO spend, there's usually $3 to $5 million in early pay discounts being left on the table. So usually that is orders of magnitude more than the labor costs for your AP department. It's the difference between a cost center and a profit center for an AP department. So I think in terms of KPIs, those are important. Have your KPIs changed as you've evolved down this journey? Have you added more KPIs? Are you still measuring the same things you were before?
No, we slightly modified the KPIs. Like I mentioned, initially it was more into the effectiveness. Right now we do have KPIs as a combination of efficiency and the effectiveness, how fast we resolve the errors. So still we do have errors. It's not to the same extent we used to have in the past. Still we do have. Now the question is that how fast we come back. Then in the past, I would be tracking how many emails we get in our help desk, that email, the AP help desk. Now it is so less. So we know that there is not so many issues coming from the vendors because it's a pretty transparent process, which means there are less invoices getting lost in transit. There are less issues with the payment because, as you mentioned, the invoice date is recognized correctly and the payment is made on time. Or even if the payment is not made on time for whatever reason, then there is a communication going back to the vendor. So yes, our KPIs have changed. I would expect our KPIs may change 1 year from now because the KPIs are living and breathing in my perspective where we stand from automation and journey 1 year from now. So yes, It has changed. And also interesting thing which you mentioned about this early pay discount and the general relationship with the vendors. So since we were, and we just launched some of these tools before the COVID hit us. So we already were seeing some improvements in this process. So as we were going through this pandemic, just over the night, all my team, they were working from home. We expected things to work, but we really did not test it out for a situation like this. But luckily, things worked out. The system held up, bandwidth held up, and we were able to provide the same level of transparency to our vendors. So we were not getting a lot of escalation email during this crisis. So I would say these are the benefits which we saw from just embarking on the automation. And then from a rebate perspective, something which we track. And if it was an issue 3 years back, we don't see that kind of level of issues now. It is more on an exception basis rather than a norm.
Interesting. Naveen, there's a question that came in that I think you'd be uniquely positioned to answer, and that is, given the challenges that initially existed in the manual process, can you walk us through how Datamatic Solution helps identify what those problems were? Was that just in the as-is to be discussion, or are there parts of the tool that are able to identify those issues?
So just those were part of our as-is and to-be discussion. Definitely there has to be. Because as we were talking about KPIs earlier, and the way process matures over the period of time, for example, one of the most important KPI after a certain level of maturity also becomes what is the state pass-through. For example, in the non-PO invoices, if it is a utility invoice, do we really need approval mechanism of electricity bill or any utility invoice, or we can state pass-through pay and then we can handle dispute later? So as is to be process defines that what are the checks and the controls which are really necessary and which can really be built in as a validation in a to-be process so that automation can take care of all those control checkpoints. So all those assessment and diagnostic when we do for as a process for any of the partner, we really come forward with the roadmap of 30, 60, 90 days kind of a plan that, okay, this is how we will go with the low-hanging fruit first, where we will automate the process, bring in more efficiency and then effectiveness later. And that is how we will mature and graduate to a more and more transformed process over the period of time.
Interesting. As was mentioned, the biggest concern were error rates, and one of the most common errors that AP departments face are duplicate payments. How do you manage duplicate payments in your tool? Is that something that the visibility that the tool provides enables you to be able to identify sooner, or are there other things that are worth mentioning?
So basically, the duplicate payments are validated and filtered, right, as an exception, where systems flag that these invoices could be possibly duplicate because of the reasons and the logic which has been built in. Now, as an exception management, when on the workbench, when a processor sees that this is possibly these 2-3 invoices are duplicate, they can really check manually also with 1 or 2 parameters, whether the PO date is the same date, whether the invoice number is the same, amount is the same, item is the same, quantity is the same, price is the same. So if those are duplicate, then today, as Som was mentioning, today, in fact, with almost all our partners, we have reached almost some decimal points duplicate payment kind of a scenario where we have totally eliminated all the duplicate payments.
Interesting.
And also on the duplicate payment, one thing which is very important, just one is the duplicate payment. As for the benchmarking, you rightly mentioned 10 to 15% if people are handling it manually. But then recovery of that duplicate payment, the kind of effort it's put on, no one actually calculates. Because during our assessment workshop, when we are working with the partners, when we really calculate, it opens up the eye that how much effort is spent in the recovery of those duplicate payments, which is much more than processing time. And which if you quantify, then that becomes a huge cost in itself, which can be easily saved by transformation and automation journey.
Thank you. Sam, we have a question from the audience, and I'm not quite sure which direction we'll go in, but I think this could lead to a number of follow-ups, and that is, what was your biggest challenge you faced during your AP automation journey?
I would say one is the change management piece of it. Think about it, like the process has been running for so many years. And then we put a visual saying, this is what we expect this process should be. somebody to make that leap, that is one of the challenge. Then getting back to the second thing on the project itself. So when we started off the project, again, Datamatics, the bulk of their knowledge base comes from outside US. And the AP team is located in the US. So there was a challenge from a communication perspective and just the teamwork where people work together to solve the problem. So what we did at the beginning of the process, we said, okay, so this is going to be a long journey. So we had a representation from a Datamatics in our office so that there was a joint problem solving. Because it was still, when we started this journey, it was still looked at there is one team, which is a service provider. Then there is one team, which is a service receiver. But then there were the problem challenges for the implementation. It was also looked from a siloed perspective. Like the service provider was looking more from a tool perspective, and the service receiver, Gourmet, was looking, hey, I have to look at this process. But once we got the teamwork going on, it was both of them are looking from a total process perspective, not from a silo perspective. I would say these were the couple of challenges. But once we saw the teamwork kicking in, KPIs, and once we got the initial success, I think that's where the real booster and the things accelerated from that point. The initial 6 months, I would say, were ridden with challenges.
Right. The change management
then also
piece,
it might be.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just. No, what I say is that what we did to mitigate that is that then we got into, rather than getting into a monthly steering committee call or something like that, we just made a 30-minute weekly call where it would be just, sometimes there would be blockers. Naveen may have to get in from his side to take care of it, and sometimes I have to get in. So what we did is that rather than have this elaborate steering committee just to see what is the status once a month or once every 3 months, we just had a 30-minute, very precise weekly call. So there is a very transparent process. Whatever the challenges, what is the progress, what are the challenges, and how do we solve it? And that helped us to gain the momentum. And we still continue that process now, but we don't have to be on the call for 30 minutes. It's pretty fast right now. Thanks. Back to you, Jess.
That's important. You've described your relationship with Datamatics not as simply the vendor you bought a tool from, but as your partner. And I think, I think we're able to start to see how important a true partnership with a solution provider is. It's not just a company that unwraps something from a box and plugs it in, but someone that that sticks with you throughout this journey and is as invested in your success as you are.
Fully echo that, yeah.
The change management piece, you are by no means alone. The benchmarking study that I've referenced a couple times, we did two things. I think this is pretty unique in the era of benchmarking. I've worked with a number of benchmarking companies, and one of the things that I'm frustrated by sometimes is that benchmarks just give you a number without context. So what we did in our benchmarking study is we started with a 30-question self-assessment around process standardization, and then we got into the operational benchmarks, the how efficient, how effective are you? And so what we're able to drill down into is not just what does top performance look like from a performance numerical perspective, but what are top performers doing differently than everyone else? And what we found unequivocally is that combination of process and technology is crucial. Within the process piece, the area where people have the most challenge, I was just looking at the numbers this morning, 53% of organizations are stuck at the most remedial change management step. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of organizations are struggling with their technology journeys, their automation journeys, is because they haven't gotten past that initial foundational change management piece, right? They haven't convinced folks internally why they're changing how they do what they do. And I think the fact that you're candid enough to share that was your challenge as well, I think speaks to the transparency. It's not just about numerical transparency that automation provides, but I think what truly separates successful organizations and successful automation journeys is transparency and realizing that we're all on the same team. And a lot of organizations struggle with that. And so being able to overcome that, I think, is really, really important. And it's not just within AP, within the AP silo. I think one of the things that's interesting is how many different business units need to be called in, right? You mentioned in the very beginning that when there was a problem that it escalated up to procurement. Certainly the controller and AP team aren't doing this in a silo. There's the IT department that's playing a crucial role. Can you speak to the role of IT in this initiative and throughout this journey?
Sure. So from an IT perspective, our IT team was already involved in implementation of ERP system. So not much we tapped into the IT resources internally. But where we got support from IT is that when we were this OCR technology, which has to talk to our systems, so we got support from our IT team from the interface standpoint. So that was one of the main contribution from IT. Now also what we have been working in the US is that just from a gate group perspective, we have been the one who are taking the lead to see what else, because in the entire gate group, we are one of the large regions, the US region. So we were embarking on this automation journey to see how it works. And then potentially this could be dispersed across the entire gate group. So from IT perspective, the support we got was one from a technology perspective, getting the tunnels in with Datamatics, because this sucks a lot of bandwidth. So those were the support we got from IT.
Interesting. I think that's certainly a crucial role. We have another question that's come in for Naveen, and that is around what the Datamatics offering integrates into. I think there was a slide, one or two slides before this, that listed a few of them, but if you could just recap, what are the ERPs that you integrate into? Yes, this is it. The ERPs that you integrate most often into, is it SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft, Lawson?
So mostly it is SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft most of the time. But we have done projects and we have our given solutions where we have integrated with JD Edwards and even AS400 mainframe based Mapex and Copix ERP as well. Great.
Can you also speak to RPA? I think robotic process automation is one of those things that people hear the buzzword but aren't quite sure what it is. I know first time I heard it, I envisioned a robot sitting at a desk punching keys, but that's not what it is. It's a way of
yeah, you are right. You are right.
Right.
So basically,
so can you talk more about the RPAs that were used here? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So the whole journey is is from data ingestion to data processing to data reporting, where the entire RPA, robotics, as well as everything is totally tightly integrated for the entire process flow.
And can you speak more to the TrueBot and the 100% accuracy, right? When we talk about OCR and other things, 80% accuracy is usually the goal. 100% accuracy is off the charts in terms of success. Can you talk more about what TrueBot offers?
Just like a manual data entry which you are doing from a front end in either SAP, Oracle, or PeopleSoft. Now, TrueBot is a robot which has been created for logging in and then actually entering data sort of from a front end. So it has been configured by the business logic where there is no mistake whatsoever. It is possible. Let's say, for example, as a Naveen Gupta, if I'm logging into Oracle and I'm entering a transaction, the same TrueBot is replicating my steps of entering the data, posting the data into the ERP. So it is 100% every point of a time, because we have not configured in a TrueBot or a robotic process automation any process step which can go wrong.
Interesting. Okay, and our last question is actually for you, Jovi, and that is, we're starting to get some folks who would like to share this presentation with their colleagues. When and how can they receive the on-demand materials?
Yes, so the on-demand materials will be emailed to everyone within 2 business days, and this will include the link to the recording of today's presentation as well as a PDF of the slides.
Great. Well, thank you, Jovi. Thank you, Naveen. Thank you, Sam, for an excellent presentation. I think we can see why Gate Gourmet has been so successful and why Datamatics was such a fantastic partner. Thank you for joining us this hour, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Jess.
Yes.
Thanks for everybody participating.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Jovi. And thanks, everyone, for participating and patience listening. Hope it will give you a solution towards your transformation journey for AP processing as well.
Yes, thank you, everyone. That's all the time we have for today's program. I just have a few quick housekeeping notes to go over before we officially close out. If you could please fill out the short evaluation form that will appear once you close the webinar. This will better help us serve your needs in future webinars. And again, the on-demand materials will be emailed to everyone within 2 business days. Thank you again to Naveen, Sam, and Jess for a great presentation today, and thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time out of your busy days to join us. This webinar was brought to you by IOFM and sponsored by Datamatics. Thank you all and have a great day.